to be here.
So I was telling Q and Eric that we'll get started at 12:01 and I'll do my introduction, then you guys can take over.
This is your show. You let us know what you need.
Yep. Who plans to share their the presentation on your end?
I got it.
Okay.
Can everyone see my Esker background board?
Yeah, it looks very nice. Right, well, we'll go ahead and get started here. So this is the first meeting for SEI Philadelphia for the 2022 to 2023 year. I'm excited to get the year started. I think we have a lot of good things in place that we'll talk about at the end. Some upcoming items that we're planning for this year. So I'll have some housekeeping items to go through to begin with. So this meeting will be recorded. As I've mentioned, it's the first meeting of this year. And we have our website link there, as well as an email that you can reach out to contact us directly. You can also reach out to me directly in the email that sent you this meeting invite. So then next slide, thank you to the SEI board. Everybody pictured here really puts in a lot of effort, from the golf outing to student events to coordinating all the different responsibilities. So this is my year as chair. Everybody is progressing through their different positions, and thanks to James Greco as well for leaving us off last year in a good spot. So thank you to you guys. Then one thing we wanted to mention is the golf outing sponsorship from this previous year. Sponsors are on the screen here. We had a really successful golf outing last year that generated around $3,000 in order to use towards scholarships in the Philadelphia region for students pursuing structural engineering. We're going to have another golf outing this year in May. Look out for more information about that. So then, welcome to this meeting. Please mute yourself when you are within the meeting. And then if you have questions, which we will address at the end, please just drop them in the chat window that I'll help moderate in the last 5 to 10 minutes of the presentation. And if you have any follow-up comments, you can contact us at thephillysei@gmail.com. Okay, so, today's topic is the New York City East Side Coastal Resiliency Project. Many of us know about it and the efforts that are going on in New York City. It's a significant effort that many companies are involved with. And luckily today, we have 3 individuals from the Coastal Resiliency Project: Tulon Ding, Eric Ilovich, and then Q Amiri. So they will be speaking with us today about the about the project that is going on up in New York City. So I will pass it over and stop sharing, and Q, you can begin sharing.
We good? Yep. Hi, everyone. Again, my name's Tulon with the Coastal Resiliency team here at DDC. Happy to be here with my 2 colleagues, Q and Eric, project managers in the Coastal Resiliency team at DDC. Before we actually dive into the project, I do want to talk a little bit about our agency, what we're up to, and just the latest initiative that DDC has. So I don't know if anyone is aware, but you may or may not know that DDC is made up of 12 divisions. We have in-house designers that sign and seal plans on behalf of the agency and on behalf of our city partners and our sponsors. It's been crazy during the pandemic. I felt like our agency was actually pushed to do so much more, especially in a lot of the emergency contracts that we have and combating climate change. What you are probably most familiar with is that we manage consultant designers and contractors to build city projects in New York City. And I think that's kind of what the bulk of our efforts are for DDC in New York. This is our up-to-date agency performance snapshots. Are just to really let you all know, our sponsor agencies are mainly DCAS, DEP, DOT, Parks, MOR, and for fiscal year 23 alone, our construction budget is close to $2 billion. But I think what you don't know is that we're made up of there are all these different delivery types of our projects. In here, it really is just a snapshot of our portfolio, how we measure those metrics, and like the process that we get from beginning to the end. And I think that what I want to highlight for this slide is that we deal with every small and large projects. And I think what we all know are just the large projects, but I do want you to see that we have front end units, we have NWBE operations. It's just so much that all goes into one project, but I think consultants and designers only see maybe just us, see our designers, but I want you to know that we have all these other units that we work for, PM, front end planning, public buildings, budget, everything. We all really work comprehensively together, which gives us this snapshot right here. For the next slide, what I do want to let everyone know is that DDC, not officially, but we have ready a blueprint that we're able to produce that really focuses on streamlining project delivery here at DDC by expanding our toolbox for procurement, for getting it from beginning to the end, for working through all of our units internally to really improve the process with the designers and our other city agencies. In this blueprint, it describes strengthening, our industry opportunities for MWBE firms, and really DDC, we're only able to capture this by our past, present projects, and also just looking forward to our future projects. As you all know, Eastside Coastal Resiliency was a direct response from Superstorm Sandy that happened 10 years ago. This year's the 10-year Sandy anniversary that you may all be aware of. And I don't think we would have gotten where we are today without DDC learning every day that process. We've been forced to really be flexible, and this blueprint really captures that efficient initiative that we're trying to put through. 10 years ago, we got hit with Superstorm Sandy. We didn't know what to do. City applied for federal funds. We got it. And of course, it came to DDC to manage it, to manage the consultants, to manage the construction. But as you all know, with federal funding and very specific federal funding, it didn't really fit in our cookie cutter way here at the city agency. We're continuing to learn our lessons learned as it applies to Eastside Coastal Resiliency, as well as the rest of our coastal resiliency portfolio. It's constantly changing, and Q and Eric will definitely highlight that on what we've been through during the course of design and kind of what is being constructed now and how we're able to push that through for the rest of our projects. One of the big things I want to make sure that I point out is that this initiative, the Blueprint Initiative, which I have on my desk, it also describes how DDC and the city is responding to climate change. We're making it an obligation now for our sponsor agencies to include that into all current and future projects for New York City. And then I'd like to pass it on to Q to really describe our portfolio and how we're implementing that throughout. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Tuan. Hi, everyone. My name is Q Amiri. I'm with Department of Design and Construction and Coastal Resiliency Unit, Deputy Director for Design and Community Engagement here with my colleagues here. I'll just quickly go through our active portfolio that we have right now. A couple of the projects are in the pipeline, but this is what we're working on in our program, and Eric is going to dive deeper into the Eastside Coastal project in a couple minutes. Just a quick overview, we have 5 active projects, starting with the East Side project. As Tula mentioned, this was sort of the inception of our unit, and our program and the rest of them sort of followed suit. Brooklyn Bridge Montgomery BMCR is the tail southern end of the East Side project. On the northern end, right now we're early stages of the Bellevue campus, coastal resiliency in Manhattan, and we also have a flyover bridge that connects two different areas of the East Side coastal. That was sort of a result of the East Side project. I'll talk about that in a second. And we have Red Hook coastal resiliency that's in obviously Brooklyn Red Hook. Really quick info cards on them. Again, Eric is going to dive deeper into this. All of our projects in our program have some amount of federal funding, either from FEMA or from HUD, and they all come with a lot of attached strings that we have to follow, a lot of requirements and protocols to make sure we comply with the requirements of the federal funds. And there's typically timelines and deadlines associated with all that for deliverables. So we have to run a very tight ship with our projects, and East Side was our first sort of baby of our program, that we have a lot of lessons learned here. One of the biggest major city construction projects in decades, and it's a 2.5 mile, if you're not familiar with it, 2.5 mile stretch on the east side of Manhattan, stretching from the lower 20s going down to Montgomery Street and Lower East Side. Project budget is about $1.5 billion of total design and construction. We have about $338 million from HUD award, and the rest of that is a city match, city capital funds. I'll leave the rest of these details for Eric's slides, and he'll walk us through more of these nuances. The next project that we're working on, this just wrapped up design about a year ago, and it was finished by, the design phase was finished by our sister agency, Economic Development Corporation, EDC. This is the BMCR project. We were involved within the design phase with EDC, but it transferred over to our agency for construction. So we just finalized our procurement phase, and now we're ready to award the notice of proceed to the contractor who's been selected. This is about a little over $500 million project budget with $172 million from HUD, similar to ESCR. This is a HUD-funded project, and the rest of that is city capital funds. Designing to a 100-year storm surge, and the majority of the project is flip-up gates, some flood walls, some swing gates as well, and we're anticipating breaking ground in the next few months, either side of the turn of the year, hoping to wrap this up in 4 years' time. Next project that we have is Red Hook Coastal Resiliency. This is right now at 90% design, with DDC handling the design and construction. It's broken into 2 project sections, Atlantic Basin and Red Hook, and Beard Street on the bottom left side on the screen. We have about $100 million for this project. This is FEMA funded, not HUD, but FEMA has its own separate requirements and strings that we need to comply with. Feasibility study was led by the mayor's office a number of years ago. It wrapped up in 2017. And once it transitioned to a capital project, it came to our agency for both design and construction. We're designing to a 10-year flood elevation for this project. There's a lot of constraints in the built environment, and it's a very congested and heavy residential area with some industrial areas. Obviously, it's Red Hook, but because of the constraints that we have, we weren't able to design similar to ESCR. We weren't able to go to 100-year flood protection, unfortunately. So as part of this project, we're also incorporating the Brooklyn Waterfront Greenway that's being extended along from Atlantic Basin all the way down to Beard Street, and we are hoping to break ground by the mid to end of 2024, once we get through our procurement and ULURP phases in 2023. and anticipating about a 3.5-year construction phase. Our next project is the Bellevue Coastal Resiliency. This is the northern end of Esker that sort of expands going up to 30th Street. It's a flood wall. It's early design phases, early design stages, and we have FEMA funds for this project with city local match. We're anticipating to complete the design by the end of 2024, just about 2 years from now, and hopefully break ground in 2025. With that, East Side Coastal Resiliency, I'll hand it off to Eric to walk us through the details here.
Hi, everyone. As Q mentioned, Eric Ilevich, Deputy Director of the Coastal Resiliency team here at DDC. I'll give you a little project background, share a little bit about how we arrived at the design criteria, show you some of the design, and then actually some of the progress that we've made in construction. I have a handful of slides, so I'll try to just breeze right through this. As Tulan mentioned, we're just about on the anniversary. The 10-year anniversary of Sandy was actually October 29th when Hurricane Sandy actually impacted the greater New York City area. It wasn't just a hurricane, it's also referred to as a superstorm. And the reason behind that, as you're maybe familiar, is that it was about 1,000 miles wide. The timing was such that it occurred at the highest tide of the month, a spring tide, due to the full moon. The pathway took an unusual turn, as you can see here in this image, taking a direct hit into the New York City area. The surge was pretty significant. Down at the Battery at the lower end of Manhattan was about 14 feet storm surge above grade at that location. And the damage that the city sustained was significant as well. 44 New Yorkers lost their lives. We had $19 billion in damage. And lower Manhattan was in the dark without power for a handful of weeks after that. So after the storm, Tulan also mentioned that the city sponsored a couple different initiatives. One was the Special Initiative for Rebuilding and Resiliency, or SIRR, which convened and produced a stronger, more resilient New York. And in that's where we begin to see the foundation for the ideas that really started to inform our project, which was essentially install an integrated flood protection system in lower Manhattan, including the Lower East Side. So around that same time in 2013 and 2014, HUD sponsored the Rebuild by Design competition, or RBD. The winning entry was called the Big U, or BIG, which stands for Bjarke Ingels Group, the Starchitect. They came up with the integrated flood protection system, which calls for a protective system around low-lying topography of Manhattan, beginning at West 57th, going down to the Battery and back up to East 42nd Street. This would be assembled in a series of compartments which would offer independent utility. These compartments were selected on natural pinch points. These are the locations of the steepest grade, which provides the shortest distance to the tiebacks to high ground. So that's essentially the inception of the project itself. Next slide. So the first component or first compartment of the Big U is East Side Coastal Resiliency. Again, this is roughly 2.5 miles of coastal flood protection, starting on the left at Montgomery Street at the south end, up to East 25th Street at the north. This will protect about 110,000 residents, of which are 28,000 NYCHA, or affordable or low-income housing. The system itself consists of flood walls, which are both exposed above grade, and then some that are actually below grade of a majority of East River Park. We're also doing floodgates, both swing gates and roller gates, 18 different locations throughout the project. There are also improvements to drainage. Not only do we want to address the issues from coastal flooding from the riverside, but we also want to manage any backups that would happen to the system or any rainfall that would happen. And so we're doing drainage improvements in a package called the Parallel Conveyance Package, but I'll get into a little more detail later. And then here it's kind of small here, but the overall goals of the project are to provide integrated flood protection first and foremost. We want to not only do that, but we also want to improve waterfront access and open space. We don't want to just build walls and wall off the community from this resource. We want to respond quickly. This is 10 years already, but we're actually just in construction now. But again, there were some timing constraints associated with the funding, which we've had to extend, but we're on track now. And then we want to seek also a FEMA accreditation. We want this site to be eliminated from the flood insurance rate map. So that's another goal of the project. Next slide. This is, again, just to highlight some of the community. Again, this is we're highlighting the NYCHA housing here, which is affordable and low income housing. Again, HUD sponsors that. They also manage and implement another remediation or resiliency measures for these sites as well. But just wanted to highlight again that this is a community in need that may not necessarily be able to manage these for themselves. This also shows you an overview of the East River Park, but we'll get into a little bit more detail here on the next slide. So this is the design criteria for how we arrived at the height of intervention. On the left, you see the floodplain. Again, this is the compartment showing the floodplain. This is the 100-year storm in the 2050s. Now that we chose the 2050s based on, again, the New York Panel on Climate Change had projections for the 90th percentile, so only a 10% chance that in the 2050s we would have 30 inches of sea level rise. But that's equivalent to the same projections for the average for the 2100s, so the 50th percentile. So if you look on the right, working down from the bottom, again, we have the FEMA 100-year still water. We add freeboard on top of that, plus sea level rise and a contingency, and we arrive at our height of intervention, which is 16.5 feet, NAVD 88. So that's just, again, a general overview of how we arrived at our height of intervention. Next slide. So as I mentioned, this flood protection system consists of both flood wall and gates. And in this image, you can see in black where the flood wall is above grade. It's exposed. You could see it. It's a concrete wall. And then the orange line is below grade. This is a majority of East River Park, which will actually all be elevated. We're doing a new bulkhead and actually bringing in many 100,000 cubic yards of fill to actually raise the park out of the floodplain. So in that case, the flood wall will actually be below grade, and I'll get into a little bit more detail there. In addition, you can see these light blue arrows throughout, which are called parallel conveyance sewers. And then there's also interceptor gates and interceptor gate buildings indicated on this. But again, I'll show a little bit more detail there. So again, this is the entire comprehensive system, including flood walls. Oh, and then there are 18 arrows here, which show both the swing gates and the roller gates throughout the project. So again, this is the coastal flood protection as well as drainage in a bird's eye view. Next slide. These are some images of the actual renderings of the project itself. This is project area 2. You can see 18th Street to the left. 20th Street is in the center of the image here, and 23rd Street is to the top right. Thanks, Q. And here was an image of what the original concept was for the entire project, which included a flood wall on the city side of this park. This is Stuyvesant Cove Park. This is a much narrower park than East River Park. But this shows you what the actual idea was behind the initial concept, which was to do the flood wall to soften the look of that on the riverside by putting in this berm and this meandering pathway. But at the same time, while resilient, the park is still being sacrificed. And we'll show you some images of the East River Park, but in East River Park, the difference there is that we have much active program space. We have ball fields, we have playgrounds, we have buildings that were, again, still going to be susceptible to not only large coastal flood events, but for more frequent tidal inundation. But this shows you an image of the original concept, again, of a wall and berm. And then we can go on to the next slide. So as I mentioned just previously, this shows you a cross-section of East River Park. The top image is of existing conditions. Of course, not only the park, but the FDR and the community are susceptible to coastal flood. And when sea level rise happens in the coming years, the entire area will be more prone to more frequent tidal inundation. won't even be a significant day or rain event for that to happen. So for East River Park, we are actually raising the entire park. Again, working from the riverside back, we're doing improvements to the bulkhead. This flood protection line, this orange line changes depending on where we would like to plant some trees. FEMA requires us to have a planting offset. We can't plant any large trees or shrubs next to the flood wall. So if we want to have trees or shade structures by the water, we need to bring that line of protection in, which is separate from the bulkhead. One of the issues that was part of our constructability review were these Con Ed lines. Con Ed has a large generation station at 14th Street. They provide distribution to all of Lower Manhattan. And of course, they use our park to do that. So these are oilostatic lines. They're pretty stable. They're pretty much in there. And so we had to work around those, which was kind of a challenge throughout the design process. So again, as I just mentioned, this is a cross section of the flood wall. The top image shows you where the flood wall is actually inland. This is a cross section taken at where we have an amphitheater. So that line of protection is further upland. And then we have, again, the slope going down to grade and then down to the river's edge. And then where we are doing that flood wall more closely to the water's edge is at the lower image. And again, you can see where there's a planting offset. These are the toolkit of options of how park users will be able to interact with the water's edge. Again, since we raised the park, we didn't want to have everyone be 16.5 feet off of the water. So we have different experiences or different opportunities for the community to interact with the water at that raised grade, and then also at the step downs or in the embayments. I have a close up of the embayment later too. Go ahead, Q. Yeah, here's the embayment. So, and again, this is an example of improved access from the city side. At the current condition, this is at the Houston Street intersection in the FDR. Right now, guests or park users have to walk into the park and make a hard right or left. There's a block there, but now we're actually raising the park up to that same grade level as that overpass of the FDR, and folks can come down. This is the new amphitheater and a new embayment, so they'll be at an elevated grade, and the way that we have been changing the grade in the amphitheater as well as with this embayment, it's a whole new experience and a much more inviting experience while also addressing coastal flooding. This is an image showing you the formwork that is done to the flood wall itself, and this was chosen deliberately. You can see that the frequency of this wave pattern was chosen based on different users' interaction with the wall. So at a pedestrian setting at the top, people would be walking, they would see that undulation or effect as the wall is going by. At a much tighter frequency, where we have wall next to a bike path in the next image, that wave frequency is a little spread out. And then where we have the wall next to the FDR for cars, the wave action is extended more fully out. So this just gives you just a glimpse of another design choice. We didn't want just, again, a flat wall. We wanted something that was also inspectable and maintainable by the Department of Transportation. They will be our owner and operator of the flood wall and all of the gates themselves. Next slide. Here is one of our floodgates on the left. This is in the open and stored position. This also shows you where we are tying back to high ground at the lower end. This is Montgomery Street. As you can see, the street to the left, Montgomery Street, actually is an incline. It actually is going up. So the flood wall itself actually just looks like it's disappearing into the landscape behind the sidewalk there. And to the right is the gate in its open position. And then in the image on the right, we have the gate that would be rolled across South Street, providing flood protection from coastal flooding that would be coming to the right. So that was a roller gate. This is one of our swing gates. This is at an entrance to the FDR, also at that lower intersection. Again, this is the top image showing in its open and stored position, and then also when it would be deployed in the lower image. As I mentioned, not only do we want to provide coastal flood protection and not wall off the community, but we also want to provide improved waterfront access and open space. So we had some existing pedestrian bridges that were in need of replacement. So we have 3 different bridges that we are replacing and also improving main access corridors or plazas throughout the project itself. So we're replacing Corlear's Hook Bridge, Delancey Street, and East 10th Street. We're improving the access at East 20th Street by redesigning a pedestrian plaza there. I mentioned that the East Houston Street landing is an entirely different new approach to the park. So this is just an overview of how we're doing that. So we'll take a closer look at the bridges. So this is a snapshot and overview of how we're improving waterfront access. We are improving, if you can take a look here at the image on the left, this is the existing Delancey Street Bridge. As you can imagine, if you're crossing the FDR, you have to just make a series of some sharp turns and then come into the park, and then you're actually landing on the same place as the shared use path. But the image on the right shows you the entirely new condition where you're essentially flying over that shared use path and entering at the newly elevated grade in the park itself. So this is, again, a brand new tide arched bridge. Also want to note here that universal access was also a goal of the project. So our grades are at the maximum 5%. And all of these entrances and approaches to all of our pedestrian bridges are universal access. Again, as I mentioned, these are the 3 different pedestrian bridges that we're replacing: Corlear's Hook, Delancey Street, and East 10th Street. We can go to the next slide. This is the Corlear's Hook Bridge. This shows you just, again, the tide arch. These are different images. The Williamsburg Bridge is in the background. We're also doing improvements upland on the upland side of the FDR to make sure that all of these pathways, again, are universally accessible. We have an overhead image of this bridge on the next site. So the East River Park is on the right. As park users come to the park, this is behind the amphitheater, but they will be at least at 16.5 feet on NAVD 88. And then also to the left, we changed the configuration of the landscape here to create, again, a universally accessible route from the upland side to the park itself. This is the current condition at the East 10th Street Bridge. To the left is East 10th Street. This is the pedestrian bridge. If you're approaching or walking from the upland side, you may not even see this bridge. Again, you have to walk onto this tight corner. Here we go. There's the, no, that's okay. Here's the, again, this is just a awkward, tight, and here I included an image. You don't even know there's a pedestrian bridge there. So unless you had your phone out or, again, familiarity with the area, you don't know that there's a pedestrian bridge or a way to get to the park there. So we have a rendering of the next image, which shows you the new condition. Again, this is universally accessible. We have a ramp as well as stairs and a new approach. And on the next image, you can see that it is visible from the upland approach. So again, this is a definite improvement over the existing conditions to make an improvement again on accessibility. The next slide. This is just to give you a brief overview of the planting palette. This park, as it exists now, was designed in the Robert Moses era, and a majority of the trees that are there now are called London plane trees, not necessarily the best as far as saltwater inundation or saltwater spray. So the planting palette now, or that will be installed, has over 50 different species of both trees and shrubs. So again, a much more diverse palette that is more resilient and at different growing speeds and at different growing levels, so that we're hopeful that it will grow back sooner and provide shade as quickly as possible. Just to show you some of the sustainable design, some of the park amenities that we are including are called comfort stations, or also athletic facilities. The image on the left is of the track house, which includes restrooms, locker rooms, and I believe concessions. The sustainable design, again, has a green roof. We have glazed brick. There's stainless steel components. So they are robust, expensive, but they will last a very long time and they will be resilient. And the color palette was chosen so that you could have wayfinding. That's the color spectrum continues throughout for each of these separate buildings throughout the project itself. Next slide. Not only do we have public buildings, but also the parks maintenance buildings are also of sustainable design. This is a charging station for the parks vehicles. Just wanted to show you that as well. We left no stone unturned for resiliency. And then I'll just do a brief overview of the drainage that I mentioned. Again, the project is addressing upland drainage issues. In this image, we have this dark blue line, which is the existing interceptor sewer. We also have outfalls that, in case of an overflow to that system, there are outfalls that drain to the river edge. But the solution for that is to, again, create a compartment in our system with these interceptor gates, which are chambers 40 feet below grade, which are operated by interceptor gate buildings at the surface level, which close off our compartment. And then we have these blue lines, which are new sewers, which are actually making improvements upon the actual system that's already there, which actually add capacity and just get the sewage quicker to those interceptors, which go to the Manhattan pump station and then off to Newtown Creek in Brooklyn. The next image shows you just, again, an overview of the improved drainage there. Again, this is a cross-section of the entire system. So our existing wastewater and stormwater are combined, and then they feed those interceptors. They do that at greater upland distances. The components, again, include wastewater drains and catch basins and tide gates. And normal flow feeds combined sewers to interceptors, and again, it's conveyed to the Manhattan pump station. If capacity is reached, if capacity is reached, and it doesn't take a significant event for that to happen, the image to the right shows you that the overflow would go to an outfall into the surrounding river. But if we had a coastal flood event, we have tide gates that would actually close and would actually cause a backup to the system, which would cause street ponding and cause backup into buildings and into basements itself. So again, the solution to that is to do those new parallel conveyance shortcuts to the system. And this is an image of the above grade interceptor gatehouse, which would house the electrical, mechanical, and hydraulic equipment to operate those large 9 feet gates that are 40 feet below grade there. So I'll just show you some images of project construction, some progress that we've actually been making. This is the image that you saw earlier, again, depicting both Project Area 1 and Project Area 2, and the parallel conveyance, which is all in the darker red. So we'll first take a stab at Project Area 1. Have an active ferry landing that is on the riverside in East River Park. So we wanted to provide access throughout the life of the project to that ferry landing. So we were able to have this temporary bridge installed to provide access. This is just showing some waterfront work that's being conducted. We have barges on the left that we're doing some of the removal of the esplanade. We also have some soil stabilization on the right. As I mentioned, we're going to be importing a significant amount of soil. So in order to speed up the settling process, we are doing stone column installation. We have some images of that on the next couple slides. These are all of the areas in Project Area 1. This is the first phase of Project Area 1 where we are doing those stone column improvements. So the next image shows you where we are drilling shafts. And then we have a system to drop stone material into that to stabilize or to make the surf or to make the foundation stronger, so that we can add fill and improve our settling rate. We are also doing construction of the eye wall at the lower end of the project. So we have a below grade sheet pile that provides stability as well as a seepage barrier. So the next images show that installation happening. We have some sheet piles going in. And again, on the image on the right shows you the location of this, which is at the lower terminus of the project at Montgomery Street and South Street. And then moving up to Project Area 2, this shows you a little bit of the construction of the flood wall itself. You can see in the image on the left some of that sheeting, the sheet pile, as well as some eye piles. And we have some concrete formwork going in the next images. This was completed earlier this year. And I think we have some images, yes, of the finished project or finished product. So the image on the right shows you that constructed flood wall. We also have the location of the swing gate, and then the Stuyvesant Cove Park, as I mentioned, and this is on the other side of that, which shows you the formwork. We also have some elevation indications showing you the actual height of intervention. This is that same gate that's being installed, or when it was installed earlier this year. It's surprisingly lightweight. You can actually have a team of 2 or 3 people actually put that into place. The next slide, this shows you the completed Astor Levy playground. This playground will still be on the wet side, so it's actually designed to be resilient. It will be floodable. This is a little bit further inland, so it won't take that direct brunt of the coastal wave action, but it is still designed to be resilient. But again, that was completed, and we were happy to turn that over to the public earlier this year. This shows you gate number 18. This is the most northernmost gate where we tie back to high ground or tie into the existing VA flood wall. So this is the installation, which just happened a few months ago. This is a roller gate, which is being lowered into its track. Okay, and I believe that's it. So I believe we're open for questions if there are any.
So a question that I had was, I saw that you shut down FDR there for a little bit over a weekend outage. What kind of penalties were written into the contract if you guys couldn't open that back up?
That's a very good question. I cannot recall personally.
Okay.
If there were specific penalties, but yeah, Tulan.
I mean, as you all know, it was a very long and lengthy process with DOT's OCMC group. But in terms of penalties, I can't say specifically, but there was a lot of back and forth, and there was a lot of commissioner discussions, because when we shut it down, it was really for the demolition of the existing pedestrian bridges. It's not meant to set a precedent for other projects, but I think an argument can be made if the project needs it during construction.
Well, it's good to hear you don't know the penalties, because then it didn't happen and there's no issue. So I appreciate the response. So there's a question from James Greco. Can you discuss the emergency response plan for deployment of flood controls?
Sure. So we worked, there was also a question about consultants, so I can tie that into here as well. So
Sure.
we have a large volume, an operations and maintenance plan, and an addendum to that is the emergency response plan. So Arcadis took lead on coordinating the operations and maintenance and emergency response plan. We worked with all of our operating and owning agencies, DOT, DEP, DEP, and Parks. SBS and EDC are also, I'm telling you all these acronyms, but I don't know if you are familiar with all of them. But again, we have operating agencies that we coordinated years-long meetings with in coordination about these 18 gates and working back from 0 hour, which again is 35 or 37 mile per hour sustained winds. That is considered 0 hour. We don't want crews out there trying to close these large, essentially sails that would be moved around by wind. So we would want the deployment team to be having those gates closed in a certain number. Again, that's a very orchestrated plan working back from 0 hour. So even 96 hours ahead of time, we may be able to close gates that are located in the park, for instance, that aren't necessarily needed for vehicle or emergency access. We do have 2 gates that actually close the FDR. So again, those may have been selected to close at a later time or closer to 0 hour. But again, that was an extensive years-long process where we worked with our consultants who held multiple meetings with all of our agencies. Again, starting from, it was an iterative process where we put some things down on paper to try to get everyone on board. And then at a certain point, not only do we have our operators, but we have to loop in the fire department. We have to loop in the police department. We have to loop in emergency management. So again, it was a pretty extensive process. Did I miss anything, Tuan or Q? Okay. Okay.
All right, so there's one more question in the chat here. Can you discuss any lighting after dusk, security measures, EMS locations, call boxes where streets are not close by?
So throughout the process for design, we did have concerns about lighting that were expressed. So we did hear from the community concerns about security. This has been a few years now, but I believe that we worked extensively to identify any areas that were of concern and address those by locating lighting in certain areas to provide both security and comfort to the community. As far as EMS locations or call boxes, we could get back to you on that. Yeah.
Yeah, we can get back to that. But I know we, at the beginning of our design, there was extensive coordination with FDNY on locations. I don't think there were much in our area. I remember going through the plans with them very early on towards the beginning of our final design stage. But if there are any specific questions that Chris, you want to talk about, we're happy to reach out and follow up afterwards.
Jack, there was one more question from Karen and Riley. I don't know if you saw that one.
What consultants assisted with design? It was ACAREF/KSC JV that were the prime designers, but we had so many sub-consultants. And then for our environmental contract, it was ACAREF/Hazen and Sawyer.
Arcadis, Jacobs, MNLA, One Architects. Yeah, quite a few.
All of them, basically.
Big. Yeah.
So I'll ask one final question. One thing that I was thinking is that when you guys, or when this program was developed, were there any places in the world that were looked at as an example, or is this a complete groundbreaking, paving your own path type of thing?
One of our lead, sorry, go ahead.
You're going to talk about Walter, right?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we're seeking FEMA accreditation. So again, when the project is installed, we are working with FEMA to have the flood insurance rate maps or firms changed to remove this area from the floodplain. So one of our our engineer of record who is certifying the entire project, his name is Walter Balmy. He is from Arcadis, who is a Dutch firm who has a large office also in New Orleans. So we were relying heavily on their expertise and experience to provide, again, background, context, regulations, requirements, everything. Because again, that's one of the project goals. We were also able to tour some projects in the area. There was a riverine application in New Jersey that we went to, which name is escaping me right now. So we did look at some deployables there, some roller gates at a site in New Jersey, and I'm blanking out right now on that. Which I would imagine what you are all susceptible to in Philadelphia there, along the river there.
Yeah, within the past year, we saw 676 get flooded. So saw some pretty crazy photos over that year. All right. Well, thank you very much to Toulon, Eric, and Q for joining us today and giving such a good presentation. I really personally liked the formwork on the walls. I think Eric did as well with respect to the speed of travel next to it and seeing a consistent undulation depending on your speed. So I'll share this final slide here of upcoming events for SEI Philadelphia. In October, the plan is to have a student outreach event at Mid-Atlantic Steel and have a fabrication tour. Then followed that up with a yearly cornhole tournament. It'll be our third year. We had one in 2019, 2022, and we'll have another in 2022 year, but for this next year. Next month's speaker will be Brandon Chavel with Michael Baker. And then we'll have a golf outing, in May 2023. So get ready for that. We'll start advertising for it soon. And Q, Toulon, and then Eric, you guys will be getting a speaker gift. It used to be a pint glass, which is shown here. We'll send you some SEI emblemed golf balls, I believe, in the mail. So we appreciate you guys joining us today. It was a really good presentation, so thank you.
Thank you very much for having us, everyone.
Thank you all very much.
And
Thank you everyone. Thanks, Jack.
Yep, and see that in the chat that there's the PDH certificate, so please download that there, and if you need it, let us know. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.